Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the International Women's Day panel. Today, we're very excited that we have two champion women who've done really well, but also come through a journey with us today on the panel to share their experiences with us. Today, we have, on the one side, we've got Grace Wong, and we also have Leanne Wells with us. I wouldn't say too much about them because I really want it to come from them and from for all of you, our audience, to hear directly from our two panelists and our two special guests today. I might actually start with you, Grace. So, Grace, I know that you're a pharmacist, but you've also done a lot of clinical work before you got onto your role today. And at the moment, you're playing a very important role at Jean Hales, who's championing women's health. And you actually play a crucial role heading up health professions, training and education and programs. Would you like to give a bit of introduction about yourself and your journey so far?
Thank you. Thank you, Faye, and thank you, PSA, for having this really incredible event to discuss. And I guess what lies for me and why I work in women's health is that I really believe that having a more harmonious society lies with having better health for women at all life stages. And because when women are healthy, everyone's healthy. It's a more balanced and valuable world. And for me, I've come from a background of working in hospital pharmacy and including in remote areas in Australia and also in some very disadvantaged areas in Australia and overseas. And what I've seen is that there are many situations where women are, access to healthcare is either limited or denied, where particularly, where women are from a minority group. I've also noticed that in the hospital setting, and also home medicine reviews, that women and men might present differently with different health conditions, and sometimes that might lead to delayed diagnosis for women. And we also know that women have a high level of chronic disease, and there's also some socioeconomic disadvantage throughout life. And I guess for all those reasons, it's really led me to this current point of taking up a role at Jean Hales for Women's Health as the head of the health professional program. All these experiences in my work and personal life have highlighted to me the importance of really championing women's health and also empowering health professionals such as pharmacists who are a really key component of the primary care and tertiary care landscape to be able to feel the confidence and also have the right tools and information to support women throughout Australia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace, for sharing your journey with us. I really like what you said earlier around empowering pharmacists to do more in the area of women's health. So park that thought. I'm going to come back to you later and we're going to explore that a bit further together with Leanne. Leanne, if you're happy, I might come to you now. Leanne, so I know you are not a clinician, but you have had extensive experience being involved in health policy. You are also championing, consumers' voices and what consumers and patients need. You have been involved a lot in the background, whether it's working with the department or policymakers and funders to really provide that infrastructure that guides what we do as pharmacists, as health professionals. So I'm very keen to now come to you now, Leanne, if you're happy to share a little bit more about your journey and the important role that you play at the moment, because most of the time people hear about clinicians and they hear about what clinicians do on the outside, because that's what we see, but we neglect to consider about health policy that's underneath. Would you be happy to share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Faye, and likewise, pleasure to be here. I guess my journey, I tend to think of myself as a bit of a boundary spanner. I've worked across the public sector, as you've talked about, in public policy for many years, but I've spent the last probably 20 years, I suppose, of my career working in the non-government primary healthcare space and health consumer affairs, as you say. And I suppose I've always gravitated, reflecting on my journey, I've always gravitated to areas that I think are of vital importance to women's health. And the pharmacy setting and the role of community, not only the role of community pharmacists, but the role of pharmacists in all sorts of settings as well. So I've worked, I suppose, intensively across preventative healthcare, primary care and mental health reform. And they're really key areas where there's so much to be gained for better women's health and wellbeing. But I think they're also key areas, and I do include pharmacy, particularly community pharmacy, in my definition of primary health care. Primary health care and trusted settings like community pharmacy and trusted professions like pharmacists, they're critical to advancing women's health. So as a non-clinician, as you say, I'm not a clinician, but I love working with clinicians. I've worked with clinicians my whole career. And I think another reflection on my journey I would offer is that I've seen the benefits and the power of what I call clinical consumer alliances. Ministers, departments, media really like it when they can see that there's some common purpose and convergence about what we need to do to solve some of our wicked problems in healthcare, when the clinical community and the community, the wider community and health consumer advocates agree on a path forward.
Yeah, that's so important. And Leanne, I really like what you've said as well. You know, there is that holistic approach that we need to embrace when we're trying to address any health concerns or health conditions. In this particular instance, if we're talking about how do we actually promote women's health, we really need to come through the lens of how we can work collaboratively, regardless of what roles you play, whether you are, next to a patient's bedside, or you're working in the community, or you're integrating yourselves in primary care, or behind the scene working on all the infrastructure. So both of you have actually mentioned about pharmacists being very crucial in helping to improve women's health. Grace, I might come to you if you're happy. Being a pharmacist and now working to help support health professionals across the country to do more for women's health and to upskill themselves to provide more for women's health. What's your perspective around why it's so important for pharmacists to be on board? And can you elaborate on the core roles that you think pharmacists should embrace when it comes to women's health?
As a consumer and also as a health professional, I see that pharmacies are actually one of the most accessible places to obtain healthcare. They're often a hub for preventative care. It's a great opportunity at that point when women do come into pharmacies. They're offering that holistic and whole person approach to care. And I think it's a really great space to do that because there are so many resources available to pharmacists. I also believe that because gender is at the heart of all health and all disease pathways, we really need to consider the gender when we're looking at health promotion, prevention and healthcare as pharmacists. And there is a lot of opportunity for pharmacists in primary care, but also in other settings, because they can reach women at all life stages. For example, by providing counselling and advice. They might be offering disease state management support. Maybe it's preconception and prenatal care and what is safe during pregnancy. I think that's a huge role for pharmacists. Immunisation at all life stages, and of course emergency contraception, and then most recently these UTIs and contraceptive trials, the prescribing under protocol, reducing barriers to access. So I think there's a really key role for pharmacists because they have this opportunity all the time to be liaising, connecting with women throughout their lifespan. I think also pharmacists have a really crucial role because at this point of interaction, they have an opportunity to discern whether treatment can be offered at that point or whether referral is required. There's something else that's that they've picked up from that questioning. That this person may need further assistance. I'm thinking about examples like if someone's coming in for regular analgesia, for their period pain, or maybe they're having heavy menstrual bleeding. I mean, that might actually trigger further referral or maybe more exploration required. And for a pharmacist to have this opportunity at that point to be really, I guess, really confident in their own skills, and to be confident that they are supported by resources out there that are evidence-based and reliable. And I work at Jean Hales, and we do develop evidence-based resources. So I would really invite all PSA, all pharmacists to come and have a look at our resources. We have many CPD that can help with, I guess, upskilling, refreshing, to know, I guess, what are the signs and symptoms to watch for, and to discern when to refer and when not to. So I guess in answer to your question, Faye, I think it's, yes, I completely think that pharmacists are in a very opportune place where they work to make this intervention a very valuable intervention for women. And the second thing is that because they are in this position, that they have I guess almost a responsibility to really be up to date and upskilled in women's health topics, so that when those questions come in, they know what to do.
Thank you, Grace. A few keywords there that you mentioned. You talked about how, pharmacists are accessible. You also gave a few examples about what pharmacists could do in terms of helping women throughout their life cycle, postnatal care, even pregnancy and breastfeeding care. And you've talked about the current trials, like managing uncomplicated UTI in women. You also talked about pharmacists providing in some jurisdictions supplying of oral contraception and all of that. So clearly, from a pharmacist perspective, we feel we could do a lot more in that regard. But Leanne, from your perspective, because you've done a lot of work with consumers, now coming through the consumer's voice and also through the lens of policymakers, how do you see that? Do you agree with what Grace has mentioned? Do you also believe that from those lenses that there's clearly a need for pharmacists to be doing a lot more?
Oh, look, absolutely, Faye. Look, I think modern healthcare, what we hear about now, and we're hearing ministers, Minister Butler sending signals about, all workforce, pharmacists and allied health working to their full scope of practice. We've got enormous pressure on access to general practice, particularly in some areas of the country. So, it really is a situation in terms of community access to care, to frontline primary health care, that we've got all hands on deck. So I think for there to be much more collaborative practice between GPs and pharmacists and nurses, but for the scope for there to be also independent practice by pharmacists in clinical care, direct to patients, is really on the radar and a direction we've got to go in. But of course, in a safe, evidence-based way. I think that goes without saying. I guess the other point I would make too, and reflecting on what Grace had to say there too, is healthcare in the consumer's mind is much more about beyond the pill. Yes, we need medication, we need safe medication access, we need safe medication management, we need good medicines literacy, but community pharmacies, where people go, or pharmacists are trusted, whether they're asking questions of a pharmacist in a hospital when they're about to be discharged. They're a community pharmacy. They're available in your local suburb. It's just where people can go for really trusted information, and sometimes, a short, brief intervention by a pharmacist, or even a pharmacist assistant for that matter, can really make the difference for people. So I would really say that that's the direction we're heading in. And contemporary discussions right now. We had PSA as one of the voices at a roundtable recently on social prescribing, recognising that pharmacists, along with others that people go to for trusted healthcare, are also well placed to provide, at the very least, some signposts into services in the local community that might benefit people, because they know the families and the people that come in their door weekly, if not more than once a week. So I think it's an exciting horizon for pharmacy and primary healthcare in general.
And thank you, Leanne, for sharing that perspective with us, because I think it really would help us understand why we need that multifaceted approach to this whole thing. And what I'm hearing very clearly from the both of you, Grace and Leanne, I think what you're saying to pharmacists who may be listening to this podcast, that we have a lot to do in terms of women's health. We should be doing a lot for women's health. We have a lot of responsibility on our side to help promote and support women's health. And it is also our obligation to make sure that we upskill ourselves if we find that we have any knowledge gaps, skill sets gaps that we may have, in order to provide best care possible for women and girls who may come through our doors, regardless of where we are practicing. Leanne, if I could come back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that pharmacists, in addition to being obviously an expert in medicines, you mentioned that from the consumer's lens, there is that expectation for pharmacists now to be involved more in terms of giving advice around general health, giving advice around just holistic way of living. That actually aligns with the key findings from our current Pharmacist in 2030 consultation. So one of the key findings from that was that there is an expectation for pharmacists to continue to play the role as being a medicine expert. But in addition to that, there seemed to be a drive for pharmacists to also be involved in providing better health care in terms of managing chronic health conditions. Do you think that would align with the consumer's views?
Well, I do, Faye. I think, and there's more work to be done on gathering more systematically consumer insights around this, and that's underway. But it speaks to the things that you hear time and time again through the consumer consultations I've been involved in. What matters to them is access, it's trust, it's relational medicine, as the literature might call it. Having the assurance that who they're talking to knows them and something about them and their family and their circumstance. So, I think the idea that, pharmacy, and we're obviously talking about largely community pharmacists, pharmacy settings here, the idea or the notion that that's a healthcare destination or a healthcare hub, I think Grace used that term, is probably already there in the consumer mind. I think it's a question of, policy levers and funding levers and all of those sorts of things needing to enable and equip pharmacists and relevant settings that pharmacists work in for pharmacists to fulfil, an optimal role in professional healthcare service delivery as well as medication dispensing and medication management. Obviously, I would argue, and I know many others would, that needs to be done with, certain protocols, with certain safety measures and standards around it. Absolutely the importance of interprofessional education and collaborative practice between pharmacists and other providers like GPs. But that's all possible. And I think that's where contemporary healthcare's got to go. You can have a whole separate conversation too about how, systems and communication can be better digitally enabled as well. But I think it's about the full spectrum of healthcare delivery as well. It's about, the health literacy end of it as well. People, if we're wanting to equip people to better self-manage and self-care when they've got complex chronic conditions, if they're stable there, we want to continue that. We don't want them going to hospital. So I think there's a really critical role for pharmacists as, agents of health information, signposting people to where they can find out more about their condition from specific groups like Asthma Australia and all of those disease-specific organisations, Health Direct. There's so much information out there. We just often don't signpost people to it. So there's a role there. But I think there's also a fundamental role in, boosting health literacy across the community. And that's where, women are really important, because I think, there's good evidence that if women as caregivers of children, or women as carers of older parents, it's happening to all of us these days. If you're equipped with good information, you're in with the support of providers like your community pharmacist and your GP, and more of the really well-credentialed online platforms these days, like Health Direct, then that's going to flow on. That health literacy and health literacy maturity flows down into, the capacity of children and parents to navigate the system. So, sorry, pretty long-winded answer to your question, Faye, but I think it's about a role in the full spectrum of healthcare delivery within scope of practice, and taking into account, the pain points in our system and where pharmacy can really step up and fulfil a role.
That makes a lot of sense, Leanne, and hearing you loud and clear as well, that pharmacists needs to be better integrated into primary care and providing more primary healthcare solutions to anyone, including women and girls. Absolutely. So as a shout out as well to our amazing PSA team, with all the various trials that are happening across the country, our team at PSA behind the scenes have been working with subject matter expertise such as yourselves to really help prepare training and education as well for pharmacists, to equip pharmacists to be able to do more for the patients that they are serving. I also, Leanne, I like what you mentioned there earlier, because you alluded to the appetite and the momentum in the health system at the moment to get all pharmacists to practice to, full scope and to do a lot more. And in particular, some of our audience may or may not be aware that PSA, we are also part of the National Women's Health Council, chaired by our Assistant Minister, Jet Carney, and, many of the stakeholders, including Jean Hills, are actually involved as well. So I truly think that, as we navigate through this journey, we really need to work together as a team and embrace collaboration. Now, I really like what you both have mentioned around, in terms of clinical care. But if I can now venture into sort of pharmacist representation and women representation in particular in leadership and leadership positions. So, most of our audience and our listeners may know that at the moment around about just under 70% of our pharmacist workforce are women, or they identify as a woman. Despite women making up the majority of pharmacists at the moment, they are still underrepresented, whether it's in pharmacy ownership or in some of the leadership position. I want to specifically just quote some particular stats and findings from a paper. And this is actually some great work done by our pharmacist colleagues, by Alicia Martin, who is actually on our ACT branch committee, Professor Mark Norton, who is actually on our PSA board, and also Professor Gregory Peterson from the University of Tasmania. So they did a paper that was published in 2021 looking at gender balance in pharmacy leadership. Are we making progress? In particular, they have mentioned, and I quote verbatim, overall, gender balance in pharmacy organizations has increased over the 21-year period. However, there remains a lack of women in leadership positions, particularly in the most senior positions where women held only 24% of president or chair positions over the time period. In 2018, women held 34% of these positions, despite representing 62% of pharmacists in Australia. And in concluding their findings, they said that gender inequity in leadership is prevalent in the Australian pharmacy profession, although it has lessened over time. Based on the trend from 1998 to 2018, it is predicted that women will achieve an average of 50% representation, so equal, in Australian pharmacy professional committees no sooner than 2029. Now, I know we're talking about that sort of in 5 years' time, but considering the proportion of gender within our profession and those leadership positions, I wanted to ask you both to reflect on that finding and share with us what you think about what that paper has identified. So I'll come to you first, Leanne.
Well, I think it's a societal challenge, isn't it, across many industries, and sort of almost ironical, isn't it, to think about health generally being quite a feminised profession. You'd expect to see more women in high level roles on committees, on boards, as CEOs of organisations, but that's not the case. But the pendulum, as you say, is sort of heading in the right direction. But I think it speaks to, the wider economic realities of the role of women in society, regardless of the setting that they're working in. They take time out of their careers to be child rearers, although that's a much more shared responsibility these days as well. And I think it's probably an issue of confidence and just having the wherewithal and the leadership skill sets and the confidence in your leadership to put yourself out there. So I think it's a reality. I suppose, forums like Minister Carney's National Women's Health Council, I would hope, would be looking at what some of the structural and other systemic and workforce solutions there are to that. But I think it's a real call out to organisations like yours too, isn't it, Faye? What can PSA do as the professional body to, you talked about the CPD and the professional education and upskilling services you offer and equip your members with, but what about, leadership and clinical stewardship and system leadership and roles in policy? I think those are the sorts of skill sets we're talking about here. Governance, sitting on a board comes with in itself enormous, fiduciary duties, as we know. So you don't take up those roles lightly. So I think it's incumbent on all organisations, including yours, that have a feminised workforce and a feminised membership base to be, investing and promulgating, and elevating and escalating women into those roles by supporting them with capacity development and leadership skills to do that sort of beyond clinical skills, which are really important. And you don't have to do that alone either. There are all sorts of organisations that you could be working with, and I'm sure you are, working with, to signpost to your members, particularly your female members who want to sort of take that next step into a leadership role, to go on that journey. That would be my reflection or thoughts on that, Faye.
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. That's very well articulated. I think in addition to around empowerment, you've also highlighted organizational responsibility, but also acknowledging that this is actually a cultural paradigm shift and a journey that we all have to be in together to get to the destination that we want to get to as a team. Grace, what do you think from your perspective? What's your reflection?
Yeah, no, thanks, Faye. I completely echo what Leanne has highlighted. I think the role of having mentors or people to aspire to is really quite critical. When I reflected on my journey as a pharmacist, as a young pharmacist, and then now in a leadership position at Jean Hales for Women's Health, all through that time, I've been fortunate to have found female mentors, indirectly or directly, someone to link in with, to support me, to bounce ideas off, and whether they know it or not, I do thank them for this, for their support. And I think it's really important to have those people visible wherever you're working. And yes, perhaps it's an organisational responsibility. Perhaps it's more local, at your local workplace responsibility as well, to really, as in Leanne's words, signpost for people where they can go and get assistance, where they can find someone to support them, because I think it is really challenging. I mean, when you quote those statistics, it actually made me think, wow, it's quite a lot lower than I expected. And I think my own observation is that, women are often overrepresented in caring roles and professions, and we're certainly underrepresented in leadership and particularly health leadership roles. But it's really positive to hear, though, from that report that the tide is turning and they do see progression in this space. So yeah, there's definitely a bit more work to do, but at the same time, it's in the right direction.
Yeah, Grace, role model. You mentioned about role model having trailblazers and people who've walked that path. And perhaps what you're saying as well, I was reflecting just as you were describing, maybe us as an organization at PSA, we need to do more of these sort of forums and interview people and leaders such as yourselves to actually provide examples and to help to add to the confidence of women, like what Leanne has actually mentioned. Actually, so for our listeners who, if they are, so they identify as a woman, and they aspire to get into the leadership position or pharmacy ownership, but they may have some concerns, they may have some deliberations, whether can they do this or not. What's one piece of advice that both of you want to give to them if it is to do with they have some concerns around confidence or whether they can do this if they're just considering that? What's your advice, Leanne?
Look, I think Grace's point about, if there's one thing you can do that's not going to cost you a lot of money, not going to cost you a lot of time in a busy woman's life, is if you can find a good mentor, and particularly one that works in your industry or works in an industry or a sector where parallels of experience can be drawn, that can be the best thing you can do. I've been a CEO, I've been in leadership roles, and one comment that someone shared with me, when I was first appointed to a CEO many years ago, was, you are going to find it really lonely at the top. And that comment has stayed with me. So the more you can create for yourself or link yourself into professional networks and one or two mentors, just getting over that sense of loneliness and everything resting on your shoulders is really important. Having a sounding board is really important. And that can be through informal mentorship arrangement. It doesn't have to be a formal leadership course. It's a bit horses for courses. Sometimes both is what you need, but sometimes it's that informal support that's the most powerful and valuable.
That's very good advice there, Leanne. What about you, Grace? What would you tell them?
Yeah, something Leanne just touched on, just had a brainwave for me, is that professional networking and connection. And I guess joining organisations, whether it's the PSA or maybe another one that's in your industry, is a really great way to start. And I know that I really value my professional memberships. They're definitely worth their money and while, because it's the opportunity to engage with people you don't normally. It could be people from around the country. Professional organisations also organise speakers and you can also offer suggestions of, for example, if you do want more support with leadership, that they can perhaps organise something for people, because I'm sure who the listeners who are thinking that they do want to take up some leadership positions, well, I certainly can assure you're not alone. I'm sure there are many of people out there. It's just really about connecting, and then advocating for some of those services if your professional organisation doesn't already offer these offerings. And I think that really is a great start, and it will then open the doors of opportunity to meet people and open opportunities to perhaps experience leadership positions. It's really, I mean, that old saying about networking. It's really quite true. I think it is the way that you open doors of opportunity when you are open within yourself and going to seek that. Then those opportunities come. I think that would be something I would suggest people to do.
Very well said there, Grace. I will continue with what you're saying around doors being open. PSA's door is always open. We actually are always personally, I cannot wait to meet people, to meet pharmacists, to meet actually in particular pharmacists, actually regardless of their gender, who may wish to do more and to take up more leadership positions and to do more. I'm very personally very delighted when I meet people who have that aspiration, because I think it's incumbent on every single one of us to do more for our professions, and therefore to lead to us doing better work for the people that we care for. So to the listeners, PSA's door is always open. We absolutely would love to see more of you guys being involved. Now, just in the last few minutes, on this International Women's Day, what is your final message to our listeners, Grace?
I think making women's health matter, making it as a healthcare provider that what you provide to women actually meets their needs, and using resources around you, whether it's from the PSA or from Jean Hales for Women's Health or many of the other reputable organisations that have been mentioned, to support yourself to do this. And I guess the ultimate goal is really to empower women to be able to make evidence-based, informed decisions about their own health. And I hope that today this discussion has given your listeners the start, I guess, if not they're already on that journey, to find ways to make that happen.
Thank you, Grace. And what about you, Leanne? What's your final message on this International Women's Day?
Okay, on this International Women's Day, well, I guess speaking to listeners as female pharmacists focused on their career, I think not that I would ever want to draw pharmacists away from practicing as pharmacists, but I do think we do have more than one career in our lives, don't we? So think about the benefits of being your career spanning different sectors, and because there's a lot of cross-fertilisation and benefit to be had in working across boundaries. It amounts to better public policy, I think, but also better clinical practice. And I guess then speaking to listeners as pharmacy clinicians, some pharmacy owners, never forget your role in the minds of the community as trusted health destinations and health hubs, and use days like International Women's Day, days like World No Tobacco Day. There's plenty of days where you can, as a health hub, really reinforce your role as a valued, trusted provider, source of health information, source of healthcare, and source of better use of medicines.
Thank you, Leanne. That's great advice as well. And at PSA, we really want to also help to inspire and empower women to come onto leadership positions, and to actually not only can they have a successful and rewarding career, but also at the same time able to lead a holistic life. And I think that's quite an important element in life. And at PSA, we absolutely, it's a special call out to anyone if you're thinking to be more involved. My advice is absolutely do it. We cannot wait to have more conversations with you, and to empower you as well, and to inspire you to carve your career in pharmacy. And lastly, I also want to just send my sincere thanks to you both once again, to Grace and to Leanne, for joining us today on this panel. And on behalf of the PSA, I want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. Thank you.